This is very similar language from a bill that Mr. Stuart Jones filed to recognize gold and silver as legal tender and for folks to be able to pay their taxes to collect revenue, for the state to collect revenue in gold and silver. And I don't know if y'all know this, but inflation has not been very good lately. In fact, 40% of all dollars that have ever been printed in history have been printed in the last 2 years. The last 3 quarters, inflation was supposed to go down or at least slow down. It has not. It has increased. And just yesterday, the Fed quietly announced that though they aren't reducing interest rates, instead they're going to increase their bond sell-off rate. So essentially, they're going to make it cheaper for the government to borrow money, lowering the federal government's effective interest rate on borrowing, and to sell those bonds to countries like China, while keeping interest rates the same for consumers. So the expectation there is the amount that they've cut on that backside bond rate is going to continue inflation to the tune of about 2%, is what the expectation is over the next year, unless something changes. So the customer interest rate is going to stay the same at 5.25% at best if they don't go up, for mortgages, for car loans, for consumer loans. But the federal government and other governments can borrow cheaper. So here's my proposal for us. And this is something that discussions have already been happening with the Treasurer's Office, whether they can take this money, whether they can hold it, whether they can receive funds, and they believe they can, for us to be able to pay taxes in gold and silver coins. This is allowed in the Constitution, both federal and state, in some form. It's just not done in practice. So that is my request to you. Let's actually get some hard specie in place. Texas, Utah have both been doing this. In fact, they've created depositories, and that might come up in a minute, for a long-term look at preparing for a rainy day, as Chairman Bannister mentioned. And that is my ask to you today. Simply allow the use as legal tender.
Mr. Caskey wishes to be heard on the amendment. Mr. Caskey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, I may do here what some of you might not expect, and that's I'm going to speak in favor of this amendment. I've thought a lot about it. I know you've all heard me talk about how this body must stand for common sense, how this body must stand for reasoned and thoughtful approaches to governance, that we should be mature in our deliberations here. But as I've realized, I'm a flawed and fallen sinner, and I am susceptible to temptations that have presented themselves in the political arena a lot of late, because as I've seen the Freedom Caucus take so many steps that I used to find objectionable. For example, being able to allege things like the idea that we consolidate our public health delivery agencies for purposes of efficiency in improving the lives of South Carolinians is really just a plot by the World Health Organization. It's pretty tempting. Likewise, when I heard last week...
Mr. McCravey, for what purpose do you rise?
Under the decorum rule, I'd ask that we try to maintain the debate about the subject at hand and not get off into the Freedom Caucus and all that kind of thing. And let's keep this thing going. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
All right, Mr. Hart, do you wish to be heard on that point of order? Mr. Hart's recognized.
Mr. Speaker, at some point in time, I'm not speaking on the point of order. Nothing that Mr. Caskey said, anything disrespectful about any member in this body. He's speaking in general. And if he can't make points, good or bad, pro or con, destructive or constructive, about the process, then I don't know where we're going. Because if we get to the point where we start to silence members, we all just need to leave. And that's my point on the point of order.
All right, thank you, Mr. Caskey. You wish to be heard?
Mr. Speaker, I can take the point and move on.
Yes, sir. All right, and I will remind everybody again, let's stick to the amendment, but there's got to be some latitude to which you can set up that, but we can do it You raised a point of decorum under Rule 9. All right, y'all see I don't know the rules, aren't memorized in my head. Like, he's got a bigger head than me, so he can remember more.
I got a bigger head than both of y'all, so. Are we good?
All right, all right. I deny your point of order, Mr. McCravy. Overrule your point of order. All right, Mr. Caskey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'll be brief because I want to.
I do want to remind you, confine yours to the subject matter of the.
Yes, sir. I just thought as a member of the body, I could help this chamber understand what I think amounts to a change of heart. No pun intended, Mr. Hart. That in fact I've come to support this amendment offered by the Freedom Caucus because I see the allure of approaching things differently. And so when you look at this bill, which would authorize the state, in fact, obligate the state to take gold currency offered by not just domestic entities, but by foreign entities, I don't see a problem with that. I think that if Russia and China want to make gold coins, the Freedom Caucus ought to be able to support that being used to pay taxes.
Y'all, this is the General Assembly. This is not kindergarten. So, okay. All right. Ms. Caskey.
Mr. Speaker,
Ms. Caskey.
Can I proceed?
That hat is not very befitting of you. And you pointed out rightfully that you have a big head and it does not fit. So I would suggest you take the hat off, please.
All right.
That will resolve the issue. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Well, listen, ladies and gentlemen, I'm trying to promote this amendment. And again, I'm not concerned that nothing in this amendment identifies any restriction whatsoever on the state of South Carolina being obligated to accept gold coins from China when you go to pay your taxes. That doesn't worry me at all. The idea that our state, that our counties, that our municipalities don't have the capacity to weigh the gold or silver, to test its purity, I don't think that's worth thinking about. I think that's for people who advocate for common sense. What we ought to do in the Freedom Caucus is just say things because they sound real good in isolation. And that's what I'm trying to do here, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen. I think we ought to be able to pay our illegal, undocumented workers that work at our companies. We should be able to pay them with gold coins, and we should be able to pay their tax withholdings in gold coins. Now, some of you may be wondering, isn't this overly broad? I don't think so. I don't think so. And you may say, well, can't you just, this is really about allowing private parties to enter into commercial transactions using gold as a measure of barter, which I used to have wanted to point out that that's already contemplated under our laws. And in fact, in talking with the Department of Revenue this morning, it was made clear to me that while they don't exactly have a procedure to assess the value of the transaction in that context, particularly so in a high value transaction, they can make it up later. So I'm not trying to oppose that. I guess, ladies and gentlemen, I want you to support this amendment because I want you to stop thinking too. So I'm happy to take a question. Looks like Mr. Murphy has a question. Oh, his point of order. It's about my hat?
All right, Mr. Murphy, for what purpose do you rise?
Mr. Speaker, I have a point of order under Rule 5.3B1 that this amendment is not germane to the appropriation of funds affecting the revenue.
All right. Mr. Caskey, are you going to speak in favor of this point of order?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Well,
are you going to speak on the point of order?
On the point of order, in opposition to Chairman Murphy's common sense, I think that this bill allows us to trade genie lamps in for our parking tickets, and that is the principal effect of this bill is to identify how the state is going to pay its bills and how the people of South Carolina pay their bills, and therefore I don't like it, and so you should rule in my favor.
All right, thank you for that well-reasoned point of order, Mr. Pace. If you'll cede the, all right, Mr. Pace, do that from the microphone there. Turn on microphone, please, Bubba. Mr. Pace, you wish to speak on the point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to speak on the point of order. This amendment would allow, would be part of the ability for the state to receive revenue, and therefore is germane to the budget itself, which the purpose is to spend that revenue and collect that revenue. And to elucidate a little bit on what coins are not lamps. Coins are coins. Bullion, small round things, flat, usually have people's faces on them, that have been used for the entirety of human history as money. So I just want to make sure that's clear.
All right, Mr. Pace, thank you.
Jordan, you want to put
All
it
right,
on?
anybody else wish to be heard? All right, Mr. Murphy, sustain your point of order. The principal effect of temporary provisions of laws and amendments must be directly germane, which we've discussed on ever, to the appropriations of funds, affecting revenue, or rules, regulations, and directives are relative to the appropriation of funds. Using gold and silver tender as currency is not directly related to the appropriations of funds. Thus, I sustain the point of order.